Hey guys, Mel the Terrain Tutor here again with another Back to Basics tutorial for you. And in this Back to Basics tutorial we're going to be looking at the issue of warping. Okay, now if you don't know what the Back to Basics tutorials are, they're a whole list of tutorials and videos on the basic techniques and materials that are common to all terrain building. It's a bit of an encyclopedia, to be truthful. It's getting that way anyway. There's a whole playlist full of them. I'll throw a link up to them, go check it out. Yeah, but this one's about warping. Okay, now, if you've made terrain, there's a chance you've heard of warping. If you haven't, then you probably haven't. Okay, but it is the bane of the terrain builder's life, and fundamentally it's where you do a piece, you leave it to dry, you come down the next day and you found that the edges are sort of bounded up, yeah, and it's got wings and it no longer sits flat on the table. Okay, and essentially it's the piece knackered for all intensive purposes. Yeah, so I've pretty much eliminated it from my terrain building now, yeah, through a lot of understanding, a trial and error, and a lot of different techniques that I sort of integrate all together to sort of pretty much eliminate it. So what we're going to do in this video is, and it is a theory video guys, yeah, because this is, you know, I need you to get these ideas, yeah, rather than show you, yeah, because like I say, every base is different, every material is different, yeah, you need the principles if you're going to combat warping. Yeah, so first what we're going to do is define what warping is, okay? Then we're going to look at the sort of forces involved so you can understand them, very, very simply, you know me guys, yeah, so don't panic. Yeah, then we're going to look at what you can do technique-wise with regards to those forces to sort of reduce them and make, basically eliminate warping. And then we're going to look at a couple of techniques that, talk about a couple of techniques that you can use that if you do get warping, what you can do to sort of counter that warp. And then hopefully, armed with all of that, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem for you either. Yeah, so fingers crossed, end of this video, warping will not be an issue for you anymore. Yeah, now what we're going to do is we're going to use the whiteboard for this one because there's a lot of drawings and that sort of stuff. Never filmed up against the whiteboard, so if it suddenly becomes like digital drawings on the video, yeah, it didn't turn out that well and I redid the pictures. Yeah, it's been 17 years since I last stood in front of a whiteboard lecturing, so, you know, give me a little bit of space, you know what I mean, guys? It's been a while, my drawings may not be up to scratch. Right, let's bring this closer and we'll get cracked on. Let's have a look at what warping is. Okay, guys, so what is warping? Well, like I said, if you've got a table, yeah, and you build your terrain piece, okay, and then the next day you come down and your terrain piece looks something like this on the table, with the edges raised up. Okay, that's warping, yeah, and it can get so bad in some cases that you can literally spin the terrain piece like it's on a coin. Okay, now the reason this happens is because if we have our base, okay, and then what we do is we typically apply PVA on top of it. Okay, now PVA contracts, it reduces volume and has essentially a sort of a creep effect. Yeah, as it dries. So as it dries, it pulls this way. Okay. Now, because there's no pull on this side, yeah, to counter that, it pulls these corners up. Yeah, giving us our bow effect. Yeah, which is why it ends up looking something like. Yeah. I told you my drawings weren't going to be brilliant. Okay, but it looks something like that. Now, there's two forces essentially fighting here. You've got the creep force, yeah, of the PVA, and then resisting it, you've got the resistance. I don't resist. I can't even remember how to spell resistance right now, guys. How poor is that? Yeah, but the resistance will fight on. Okay, so what we're going to do is very quickly talk about, yeah, we'll talk about the materials and the resistance first, yeah, then we'll talk about the creep, okay, because it's a little bit of everything to combat warp rather than you just do this. So there's going to be a lot of little things coming to you and you've got to pull them together, yeah, to sort of fight the resistance, guys, you know what I mean? Okay, so when it comes to the resistance, the viva la resistance, okay, talking about materials, typically I use 6mm MDF because with the other techniques I found out, you know, I can combat warping with that. Okay, there are other materials you can use. If you struggle with 6mm MDF and you're still getting warping issues, you can change to plywood. Okay, because plywood, yeah, is lots of sheets of wood, but the wood is laid down sort of perpendicular to itself at right angles, which means it's really, really sturdy. Yeah, so as a material at the same thickness as MDF, it has a higher resistance to the creep. Okay, now going thinner, you can use 3mm MDF as long as you're making smaller bits. Yeah, when it comes to very small bits, I tend to use Polystyrene. Yeah, such as just on this. Yeah, Polystyrene, because that's sturdy enough at about 1 mil, 2 mil. Yeah, anywhere in between that to sort of fight PVA and filler and that sort of stuff. Well, you don't get creep with filler, but you know, it's thick enough to be resistant enough to fight the creep of the PVA when I glue the grit down to it. Yeah, you can use cardboard for basing. Yeah, I do not recommend it. And you can do things like you can put building adhesives over it that don't creep to sort of seal it and firm it up. But I just prefer using Polystyrene. Polystyrene is also water resistant, so you know if your terrain gets a little bit damp, the bases aren't going to rot. Yeah, or you know, warp, etc. So that's the basic material, and obviously thickness counts, but when it comes down to your actual terrain bases, it's also a matter of what shape they are. Yeah, and this is very important. So I'm going to draw a couple of shapes and we're going to talk about them. Okay, so first a circle. Yeah, now a teardrop, now a sausage, kind of sausage. Okay, now when we talk about creep, yeah, we'll talk about it just lengthways, because obviously, you know, it happens in all directions, okay? But we'll just talk about sort of vertical and horizontal for the purpose of this, yeah? We apply a PVA onto it and it shrinks in, yeah? So there's a force pulling from that way, there's a force pulling from that way. But as that force comes into the piece, the thickness, the width of the piece adds to the resistance, okay? So very quickly, even though you've gone in very little with regards to the creep force, yeah, you've got a massive amount, yeah, of resistance with the width, okay? Because the resistance is how tough the material is, sort of ties by how much of the material is resisting that bend, okay? So width really counts in this, and this, girth. Right. What is girth? Is girth width or is it circumference? I can never remember. Oh, right, moving on. Okay, so if we move to this one, yeah, and we've got our forces here, our creep forces. Okay, when you look at it at this side, it's very much like the circular one. Lots and lots of resistance. But if you come up to this side, very little initially, yeah. So I would expect, yeah, for this bit to be more at risk of warping than this bit, yeah. I would not draw something that was smirk, smirk, girth, girth, yeah, you get it. But, yeah, you get the idea, okay, the resistance, yeah, compared to over here. Yeah, terrain bases like that don't work, guys. They are funny, but they don't work, okay. Now, if we go over to our long sausage, yeah, you can straight away, yeah, we've got obviously our contracting forces, our creep forces, yeah, and then we've got very little resistance compared to the amount of creep force across all of that. Okay, so that's highly unlikely to warp. Yeah, that may warp a bit at the top. That will warp. Yeah, from experience I've found that it's typically a 2-to-1 ratio. So if your piece is twice as long as it is wide, you're going to be into the warp zone, guys. You know, you're going to be looking at, you know, you're going to have to do extra special stuff to make sure it doesn't warp. Below that ratio, typically, there's enough sort of cross-section, enough girth. Is it girth? Width? I know it's width, but as it's a 3D option, is girth the term? I don't know. Yeah, tell me in the comments, guys. I'm curious. Right, yeah, but on this sort of situation, it's a 1-to-1. This one, it's I mean, it is almost twice as long as it is wide, but you can see the shape matters. Yeah, and this one, you'd be knackered completely. So the shape of your terrain bases matter. Now also, very quickly, baseboards, when you use big sheets, yeah, they're big squares. Yeah? Now you could turn around and say, well, that's a 1-to-1, that would never warp. Yeah, theoretically, No, it's theoretically it wouldn't, but you've got to remember that the warp forces come from all directions. So in the case of them pulling this way in, because they'll be pulling from all different angles, yeah, what you've got is, once again, very little resistance initially at the corners. Which is why, when you do square baseboards, 2 foot by 2 foot baseboards, if you don't counter the warping problems by stippling with filler, using spray adhesives to stick your your flop down, etc., yeah, you will get the corners peaking up, because they're the bits that can warp, yeah, but very quickly it gets far more thicker that way than that way, okay? So that's the shape of the terrain bases. Now, it's not just the shape of the terrain bases that make a matter, yeah? It's what you do with them, okay? Now, if you have a terrain base and you stick a polystyrene hill on it, yeah, that increases the resistance, okay? Those arrows are wrong, but the thicker, it's thicker, it will hold better. At the same time, you've got the PVA in between. At the same time, it's pulling on this one this way, yeah, it's also pulling on this one this way. And it is actually pulling on this one downwards, it's pulling this one upwards, and it sandwiches and holds it together. Which is why when you put one material on top of another, yeah, it drastically reduces the warping effect, yeah. So it's not so much of a problem. Now, that's the material side. So let's see now, we've covered about the thickness, the different types of materials, we've talked about the shape, and we've talked about adding layers on, okay, to increase the thickness and therefore the resistance. Let's talk about PVA, okay. Now, PVA, polyvinyl acetate, you know, my very, very favourite glue, yeah, water-based. It's got a reasonable volume, but it reduces down quite a lot. Okay, now there's a few different things, yeah. Obviously there's other glues available that don't sort of contract, you know, but they're either expensive or difficult to work with when it comes to terrain. Yeah, so it's very much about learning about how to adapt PVA to what you're doing, yeah, rather than trying to flip to a different glue. So a couple of points on PVA, yeah. Let's draw a base. Okay, now you're looking straight down on top of a base. Okay, so I've just cut this disc out of MDF, yeah, we've beveled it, we've done all that sort of stuff, and what we're going to do is we're going to glue on a piece of polystyrene as a hill. Yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? Now, what would you do? Would you cover the lot with glue, which would then have the creep all the way along, or if you put a blob there and a blob there of PVA, where's the creep from that piece? The creep is there, coming in from those two bits. Okay? It is not across the whole piece. Yeah? So what to take from this? When you're gluing your when you're gluing your hills down onto your boards, don't cover it completely. Spot it. Okay? And then that way you're reducing the amount of PVA across the entire piece, you're reducing that creep force. Okay, drastically. It makes a massive difference. The other thing is the amount of PVA you're using. Okay, when I started terrain building, yeah, I was laying down grit and stuff pretty much straight on a thick layer of PVA, all white, okay, to get it really stuck down. And what I've discovered over time, yeah, as you go on, because we seal it and all that sort of stuff, yeah, we're building layers up on it, you only need a fraction of that to actually glue your grit down and to glue your rocks down. Okay, and I'm actually at the stage now where very typically, you know, I've got a very thin covering of PVA, yeah. You know when you put PVA down and you strike through it and you get the white blobs and then you get sort of the clear shiny bit? Yeah, 60%, 2/3 of my piece when I'm gluing down is pretty typical to be shiny bit, okay, with the occasional sort of white blobs in it, because that's all I need to stick grit or flock down. I don't need tons, okay. Using less PVA reduces the creep force, yeah. reduce the creep force, reduce the chance to warp. Okay, so that's applying PVA. Spot it, yeah, use it thinly. Don't go over the top with PVA, yeah, and it will make a massive difference. There are a couple of other things that you can do. I found that by rubbing filler into this edge, yeah, before I texture it to sort of seal it, helps firm up the board because filler increases the resistance. Okay, so another little step, yeah, that helps combat warp. Now, you might not have to do all of these things, but if you know you've got to do a long, thin one, yeah, then, you know, spotting would work, increasing the resistance with filler would work, yeah, all those sort of things work, yeah. So it's about pulling all these sort of techniques together, yeah. So that is essentially what warping is. That's how the shapes of the base is, what material you're using, and how you glue things down to it affects warping, okay? Yeah, like I say, use less glue. You don't need to use that much glue. Spot it, yeah? Reinforce it with filler. Use bases that are more round and more oval rather than sort of sausage. Keep to that 2-to-1 ratio. All these sort of things will make sure that your terrain doesn't warp, yeah? But let's say you've done all of this, okay, and you've come down and it's warped. What do? Okay, there's two ways of countering it, okay? To physically bend it or to creep it back, yeah? Now, when it comes to physically bending it, let's say we've got your table, yeah? You've got your terrain piece, which is warped like that. Obviously, I mean, that's a bit excessive, you know what I mean, guys? If your tray's warped like that, you ain't going to fix it. End off, yeah? But it works for this idea. The idea is that you want to bring these edges back by physical force. And typically what we do is we use clamps. Now, you can only really get away with this because of the amount of force involved before the sort of flocking stage, while it's got grit on it, while it's painted. The moment you start putting anything bushy and delicate on it, this method is ruled out. But very simply, all you're going to do, and typically your warping would only be a tiny amount, to be truthful. Yeah, so it'd be more like that. Yeah. What you're going to do is obviously you're going to get clamps. Yeah, spring-loaded clamps, any sort of clamps, and you're going to clamp those two edges down and bend them down. But the important thing is you need to put a pivot in here. Now, typically I use a 2p piece. Yeah, the reason for this is that even if you go flat and you clamp it down completely flat, there will still be a little bit of sort of force, creep force left in. Yeah, that the moment you take the clamps off, it'll spring up a little and you'll still have a little bit of a warp. Yeah, by putting the 2 pence in, okay, you raise it by just 2 millimeters, and that's normally, you can raise it by more, I wouldn't suggest too much, but that's normally enough to bend the edges beyond the flat. Okay, so when they spring back too flat. Yeah, so dead simple way of doing it. Yeah, clamp it down, but like I say, this you can only do until to the sort of the painting stage, because obviously the clamps are going to you know, that's quite a lot of force. You know, you may have to touch things up afterwards. Yeah, if you've got foliage on there, the clamps will destroy it, so you can't do that. So if you've got to the stage where you've put your foliage on, etc., yeah, you've left it to dry overnight, you come down the next morning, yeah, and then you see, oh my god, it's warped. You know, you can spin it on a disc. Yeah, what you do is you use PVA to counter warp it. Yeah, so when we started, we talked about our base. Yeah, and we talked about our contracting nasty PVA, the horrible nasty PVA that applies a force that way. Yeah, which curves it upwards. Now imagine this base, yeah, has actually come out something like this. Bit exaggerated, but you get the idea. Yeah, and on top of it you've got some sort of a hill or trees or, you know, people. Hello! I'm about the train teacher. Oh, for God's sake. Right, so it's warped up, yeah? You can use PVA to warp it back by applying PVA to this. Yeah, and it is a simple matter of turning it upside down, yeah, and putting a coat of PVA over it. Yeah, and this will give a creep force this way, yeah, and it will slowly pull these corners back again, yeah, and it works every time, yeah. It's simple physics. The practical application is simple. I mean, the physics behind it is probably quite complicated, but you know, you don't need to know that, and I don't need to know that. I just need to know it works. Now, my tip for when you do this is don't go heavy-handed, yeah. Do it in layers. Put a thin layer on, leave it to dry. It is a process that will take a while. If you've got to this stage, you know, it's almost finished, you've got warping, which is writing off, you know, a week's work, it's worth putting it, you know, just a day or two delay to, you know, while you, time-wise to do it takes very little time. It's the drying time, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing thin layers, yeah, and you're slowly going to be pulling it back, yeah. The reason being is if you go in super heavy, yeah, to pull it back, yeah, there's a good chance you'll end up, and it'll end up more like that, yeah, i.e. you'll put so much PVA on that the creep force will be more than the other force on the other side, and you'll pull it the other way, okay. So thin layers when fixing it, okay guys, yeah, literally upside down, yeah, rest it on a couple of pots so it's stable, nice thick PVA, brush it on, yeah. You can brush it in the direction of the warp to specifically fix it. If you've got, in the case of our pieces which are like this, yeah, so in the case of our sort of pear teardrop pieces, yeah, if you've got warp here, yeah, you can just apply your PVA in this area just to correct that warp. You don't have to put it all over here, okay. Yeah, it's a specific fix for a specific area, yeah. Thin coat, leave it dry, put it back on the table, see how it warps, see if it's flat. As soon as it's flat, you're done. Okay, now there is one other sort of weird warping you can get, okay, and it's called bowing, yeah. Now we've been talking all along where, you know, the PVA on top, yeah, causes this bowing upwards. You can get an effect where it bows sort of upward. Now that's, you know, corners go upward, but it also bows upwards, so the centre rises off the table. Now this is typical in long, thin, pieces, yeah, barricades, barbed wire, anything which has very little on top sturdy wise, okay. You know, anything, if you put a wall across there, you wouldn't have this problem, but if you've got something very much like this, yeah, where you've got, you know, just a couple of tiny bits in the grit, yeah, you typically get it where your material is very thin, specifically a lot of times with cardboard. Now the reason for this is that when you apply your glue, yeah, the cardboard, yeah, typically cardboard, yeah, soaks into the glue and becomes one with the glue, so you don't have any resistance to sort of fight the creep effect, yeah. And what you get is, under here, yeah, you get the creep effect of the top of the glue. Yeah, pulling it up, yeah. On the top, because that cures, because it's typically air dried, yeah, it doesn't creep on the top, yeah. And because this gets pulled into the board, it makes the board creep at the bottom, yeah, when it raises itself up. Now the only thing you can sort of do to correct this is, yeah, because if you apply more PVA underneath here, yeah, you're just going to increase that bowing effect. The only thing you can really do is the physical bending back, yeah. But I've only ever come across this really with cardboard, and generally I just don't use it, yeah, because of problems like this, okay, because it can be a real pain to fix. As I said before, you can sturdy cardboard off by putting non-volume reducing building stuff on. You can put filler on top of it, tile grout, there's various caulkings and all sorts of stuff you can put on it, yeah. But generally I use plasticard, okay. So that's warping, guys. That's why you get warping. That's what materials you should be using to sort of fight warping. That's the, you know, thinking about the shapes, the 1:2 ratio, how you apply your PVA, you know, whether you spot it, whether you put it down completely, how thickly you apply it, whether you use extra stuff such as filler to stiffen it up a bit, okay? But overall, these are all the sort of little things, yeah, that I pull together to factor out warping. And I'll be honest with you guys, I don't have a problem with warping anymore. Yeah, so take from it what you will, you know. I hope it's been useful. I'm sorry it's a bit theory, and just 1 second. I'm sorry it's been a bit, you know, technical and theory, but it's the only way I can explain these sort of things, because at the end of the day, yeah, it would take weeks for me to try and create warping and be able to show you properly and with PVA and that sort of stuff. But hopefully, yeah, if you're having problems, the solutions with this video, guys. So that's it. That is our back to basics guide to warping. Obviously, like it if you like it. If you've got anything to say, any questions, yeah, the comments are below. I always answer my comments, yeah. So any questions, any tips, any experiences, throw them in the comments, guys. Obviously share it if you know someone who's struggling with warping right now. Then finally, guys, you know, there is the Patreon thing. If you really like what you do and this sort of stuff helps you out, yeah, consider dropping me a book on Patreon and get full access to all the old live archive show and help me to make better tutorials, you know. Obviously, as always, there's no pressure, because I will keep continuing what I do, because, guys, I love it. Anyway, guys, you have a cracking day. I'll see you later. All the best, yeah? Ta-ra.